The number of artists that the Netherlands produced during the 17th century is amazing. In this video, I'm going to talk about one of those artists, Jan van Goyen. The focus of my discussion is in one of Van Goyen's paintings in the Cleve Museum Art titled View of Emmerich. Van Goyen is from Leiden, Rembrandt's hometown. Rembrandt was born in 1606. Van Goyen is 10 years Rembrandt's senior, and they're exact contemporaries. In addition to selling his paintings, Van Goyen was an art dealer, as were many other Dutch artists, including Vermeer. Active during the booming economy of the Dutch Golden Age, Van Goyen speculated in real estate and tulips. In 1632, he moved to The Hague with his wife and daughters, where he lived the rest of his life, dying in 1656. His pure style of landscape painting with his minimal palette exerted a tremendous influence on his contemporaries. The 17th century in the Netherlands is called the Golden Age because of the tremendous expansion of the economy. The Dutch economy was based on trade, and this period saw trade expand from the Baltic and Europe into Africa, the Americas, and finally Asia and India. The Golden Age is one of the greatest periods of Western art, on par with the Italian Renaissance and 19th century France. Artists such as Hals, Rembrandt, Vermeer, peers of Van Goyen died within 20 years of Van Goyen. The Golden Age also produced the first economic bubble, and to this day, perhaps the most famous one, tulip mania. By 1634, the entire country was caught up in tulip mania. A single bulb could go for as much as $750,000, with typical bulbs ranging from $50,000 to $150,000. By 1637, the bubble burst. Buyers announced they could not pay the price previously agreed upon for the bulbs, and the market fell apart. Van Goyen speculated heavily in the tulip market, and when the bubble burst, his finances collapsed. Van Goyen spent the remaining 19 years of his life struggling to overcome the blow. But when he died in 1656, he was insolvent. A surprising number of Dutch artists also struggled financially. Both Vermeer and Rembrandt spent the twilight years of their life struggling. 1672 is known as the disaster year in the Netherlands. In that year, France, England, and several German principalities allied to attack the Netherlands. Invading armies defeated most of the Dutch state armies and conquered part of the Republic. Adding to the disaster, the Dutch water line was triggered, flooding parts of the Netherlands and turning the province of Holland into an island. Staggered by this succession of disasters, a mob fell on the government leaders, Cornelius and Johan de Witt, and murdered them in a square in The Hague. The fury of the mob was such that some people stripped off parts of their flesh and consumed them. Between the invasions and the flooding, the economy was devastated, and most historians consider 1672, the disaster year, as the end of the Dutch Golden Age. Although the Dutch economy recovered eventually, more or less, the art market never did recover its previous glory. When Vermeer died soon after the disaster year, his wife famously wrote, "During the ruinous war with France, he not only was unable to sell any of his art, but also, to his great detriment, was left sitting with the paintings of other masters that he was dealing in. As a result, and owing to the great burden of his children having no means of his own, he lapsed into such decay and decadence, which he had so taken to heart that, as if he had fallen into a frenzy, in a day and a half he went from being healthy to being dead." The early paintings of Van Goyen are heavily influenced by his teacher Van der Velde. Here's a typical example, a detailed landscape providing the backdrop for a genre painting. There's a lot of strong local color, which as Van Goyen matures, you see less of. The word genre or genre painting is very confusing, I suppose, if you're not used to the terminology. A genre is a type of painting such as landscape painting, portraiture, still life. Genre painting, on the other hand, refers to pictures of everyday life of ordinary people playing or working. Here's a Vanderbilt genre painting from 1616. Like the Van Gogh we saw earlier, the detailed landscape is a stage for the people playing and working on the ice in this particular case. Dutch genre paintings were heavily prized, not only in the Netherlands, but throughout Europe, especially in France. There's ready markets for these paintings. Even now you see reproductions of these paintings. I remember when I was a young boy, my parents had copper plates of genre scenes just like this in their kitchen. And I remember vividly my mother would set a chair on the dining room table where I would be placed, where she'd give me a haircut, and I would study those plates. And it's almost like I'm sitting back in that chair looking at this painting. As I said, Van Goyen's style had a tremendous influence on his contemporaries. So let's set the context, see if we can understand why that is. Genre painting was very sought after throughout the art collecting parts of Europe. Here's a good example of genre painting by David Teniers. By the way, I did a video on Teniers not long ago. But in this example, you can see though the landscape is fleshed out and detailed, the people and their activity are the focus of the painting, and you could actually see interiors or other scenes where the landscape or the setting was completely irrelevant, and the entire focus was on the participants. And usually these were, as with this painting by Teniers, people dancing, drinking. Drinking was especially popular subject. Also converting in taverns, like playing cards, or more lewd types of activities. In Van Goyen's mature style, the people take a backseat to the landscape, which becomes really the thrust of the painting and the subject of the painting. Van Goyen, like his contemporary Jacob van Ruysdael, de-emphasized the genre aspects of their paintings and really transitioned into landscape painting proper. Here is a beautiful early Van Ruysdael in the Cleveland Museum. You can see we have a few figures in the middle ground, but the emphasis here is the landscape, and it's hard to see in this reproduction, but this is a painting of late afternoon, that melancholy time of day, and it's really an exquisitely beautiful painting. And just have to say in passing that these Dutch painters were just exquisite craftsmen. Their paintings always look fresh. Genre painting had a tremendous influence on the latter 17th century and early 18th century, especially among the French art collecting public. But somewhere along the middle of the 18th century, reaction set in against the low, common, and more body aspects of genre painting. This genre painting by the French artist Chardin is a good example of what I'm talking about. Although it's an intimate picture of family life, there's no elements of the low or the body. There's no drinking, there's no carousing, there's no pinching ladies' bottoms. And this is typical Chardin. As the 18th century wore on, the reaction against the more base elements of genre painting intensified. Jean-Baptiste Gouys, a younger contemporary of Chardin, embodies this movement. Gouys was a favorite of the Enlightenment French intellectuals. Denis Diderot, famous for his encyclopedia, was an enthusiastic supporter of Gouys. And genre paintings like The Father's Curse were far removed from the body scenes of the Dutch genre painters. Here the tone is almost biblical, similar to the prodigal son. All the figures are animated and is seen as very dramatic. For me, Gruis's paintings often veer into the bombastic and the cringeworthy sentimentality, though I don't think that's the case in this painting. My biggest criticism with Gruis, though this is probably left for another time to discuss, he's really actually a very good artist. But my biggest problem with Gruis is the way he just slathers his figures in clothes like drapes and all these complicated shapes that I'm not sure if he's proud and showing off his prowess at these kind of complicated arrangements, or what I suspect is he's uncomfortable with some of the poses, and this is a way for him to kind of fudge it. After achieving both critical and financial success, Gruis fell out with the French Academy. The Academy loved his genre paintings like the one we're looking at, and they weren't so enthusiastic about his history paintings, and Gruis took umbrage at this, and he had a 30-year grudge against the Academy, and here's another artist that ended his days in financial distress, unfortunately. During the 17th and 18th century, the antithesis of genre painting and the highest form of painting was history painting. History paintings were expected to have an ennobling or uplifting theme of the kind that was promoted by the Enlightenment thinkers like Diderot and Voltaire. So then history paintings served the function that religious paintings had in an earlier age. Remember too that mythology was rediscovered during the Renaissance and became even more popular during the Enlightenment. There was many scholars studied it, and it became important themes in painting. And as such, it served sort of the same uplifting kind of role as history painting. So by the 19th century, historical themes were intermixed with mythological themes. We see this in David's late paintings, and they all sort of serve the same function. History painting reached its highest point with the paintings of the French neoclassicists in the late 18th century, especially in the paintings of Jacques-Louis David. This painting, titled "The Lectors Bring to Brutus the Bodies of His Son," is especially a good example of history painting and neoclassic painting, and it's also an excellent contrast to the painting we just saw, the painting by Gruis. The first thing you notice is there's a lot of space in this painting, and that of course is by design. The space serves as a counterpoint to the emotions of the upraised arms and the other gestures of the figures. It heightens the effect of those gestures the way an isolated tone or note in a sonata might. This enables these gestures to achieve their highest possible effect. And note too that these gestures, though dramatic in this painting, are more psychologically real than those in the Gruis painting. In the Gruis painting, the gestures seem like those you might see in a silent movie where everything had to be exaggerated for effect. The second thing we notice with this painting is the space is divided into two sections. The large pillar, along with the chair towards the middle of the painting, divides the painting into two parts, which break several artistic conventions. Artists are told to find ways to unify the themes and the figures in a painting. Here, David has deliberately divided his canvas up into distinct parts. Part of David's genius is he's able to unify these disparate parts to a psychological whole and a psychological realism. All right, so we've looked at some of the formal elements of this painting, but what is this painting about? What is all this stuff happening here that we're looking at? Brutus was the leader of Rome, the Roman Republic. He discovered that there was a conspiracy to overthrow the Republic, and chief among the conspirators were his sons. And putting aside his role as father, as a statesman, Brutus sentenced the conspirators to death, including his sons. And here we see the results of that. The bodies of his sons are being brought to their home, and we see in the portion of the painting in semi-darkness, shadow, the bodies being brought into the house, obscured by either a statue or a figure, and then in the foreground, partly in shadow, or you might say emerging from the shadow, we see Brutus as he transforms from statesman to father, from shadow to light. We seem to see him as he realizes as a father the full effect of what he has done, and he seems distracted. The rest of the painting, in the light, we see his wife and his other children reacting to the bodies being brought in. They're reacting to a family tragedy regardless of the statesmanship and honor brought to the family by Brutus's action. This giant painting, which is in the Louvre, is, in my view, one of the greatest paintings in the Western canon. Something else to note here before we return to Van Goyen is that a typical David in this painting, he chose a moment that combined intimacy with the family drama with something beyond that, fusing the two together in a unique way. He could have selected the sentencing trial. There had been a lot of dramatic opportunity there. He could have selected as his subject the execution of his sons, but instead he presents us this intimate look into the life of this family, which actually magnifies the tragedy. Van Goyen's technique was efficient in the extreme, probably amongst the most efficient techniques that have come down to us in the Western canon. Like his technique, his preparation was equally efficient. According to sources, Van Goyen typically applied hide glue to his surface. Surfaces usually were wood panels, and after the glue, he applied one layer of white lead paint, which had been tinted with a neutral color, which he applied it with a scraper, so it is thin and smooth. The smoothness was extremely important. So some things to note about these sources. Anybody who's tried to study studio techniques in the past know it's extremely difficult to sort out what is meant sometimes by observers. Even people who were eyewitnesses to painters' techniques, they actually didn't understand what they're seeing. So one thing that stands out to me about this report of how Van Goyen prepared his surfaces is that he applied a single layer of lead ground. Normally on wood, the artist of his period applied gesso instead of lead paint. Lead paint was applied to canvas, or actually lead paint with some chalk, which is what's used in gesso, would be used on canvas. So our sources here say he used lead paint. One way or the other, he applied a single layer of ground to his surface. Other artists of the time often applied many, many layers of ground and glue. So here again, Van Goyen is efficient in the extreme. Get a sense of how good Van Goyen is as a technician. You should compare his paintings to his contemporaries in France or Italy. The paintings of Poussin, for example, are often in pretty poor shape due to poor materials or from whatever reason. Van Goyen, like most of the artists at the Dutch school, their paintings are in extremely good condition. Not good condition for their age, but just good condition. They're often or frequently as fresh as if they were done yesterday. Next, Van Goyen would rapidly sketch his design. Rapidly, quickly, efficiently, these are the best words to describe Van Goyen and his technique. The walnut ink he used to sketch his design can be clearly seen in some of the thinner passages in his paintings, such as in this passage. In genre paintings like this, we can see why Van Gogh is esteemed by fellow artists. It's very restricted palette and direct drawing. Van Gogh has created a painting of high charm. Paintings like this remind me of Asian art that I admire. Even though Asian art was brought into Europe slightly after Van Gogh's time by the Dutch East India Company, compare Van Gogh's restricted approach to this painting from the 11th century by the artist Ku Dang called Summer Mountains. Both artists express their experience with nature through drawing a drawing that is heavily refined and simplified to the most essential points. With this painting, I think you can begin to see the elements of Van Gogh's mature style. A restricted palette, genre elements in a landscape or landscape elements in a genre painting. This painting titled An Evening River Landscape with a Ferry, and the last painting and the view of Emmerich in the Cleveland Museum, which we'll get to next, all share the same elements, the same restricted palette, the same foreground genre elements against a flat landscape and a mint sky. We know that he used a varnish oil medium, which means he added varnish made of copal or amber or maybe mastic to the oil, and he used this to paint with. Such a medium makes paint manageable and facilitates the juxtaposition of thin and thick passages that the Dutch school, and especially Van Gogh, relied on. You can see that throughout this painting. The warm, neutral ground is easily visible in parts of the sky and the background landscape, and contrast that with the white passages in the sky and the thick dark passages in the foreground. These thick and thin juxtapositions were not a secondary effect of the technique, but it was a fundamental to it. The Cleveland painting is Van Gogh-esque, isn't it? If you're going to imitate Van Gogh, you would assemble a painting like this. Genre elements in the foreground in a flat Netherlandish landscape. The palette is limited in the extreme, and it's a favorite of mine because the handling is such confidence and freedom. Look at this delightful detail. If you squint your eyes just a little bit, you could be looking at an impressionist painting. Van Gogh has used aerial perspective efficiently. There's that word again. Even though the colors are completely restrained, the brownish neutral color in the foreground contrasts with the cooler, grayer neutral color in the background, and the foreground is painted with some sharpness and detail, and the background is painted very loosely and almost abstractly. The warm tones versus the cool tones, the sharp details versus the soft details provide a convincing sense of realism, especially if you look at this painting in the gallery as it's intended. In this foreground detail of the ferry barge, Van Gogh has animated these figures with remarkable life and expression. Using little more than the merest silhouette, he has caricatured these figures. It reminds me of great caricaturists such as Callot or Damier, and the caricaturing ability is, if not the exact beating heart of art, it's adjacent. In this detail, Van Gogh again contrasts the foreground treatment to the background treatment, providing a convincing realism with the simplest means. With a few impressionistic strokes, he's given us a dockyard and a busy harbor with its ships. In this final detail that we're going to look at, we see the city of Emmerich. Van Gogh has introduced more local color with touches of green and blue. The cityscape is painted more thickly than other parts of the painting, and with great freedom. Using squiggles, smudges, blobs, and scumbles, the artist has given us the city. Finally, Van Gogh's view of Emmerich is more than anything a painting filled with light and air. The painting's central focus is the church whose steeple belongs to both earth and sky. With simple seeming means, the artist has given us a bustling city with its harbor teeming with life. A remarkable painting. With that, I think I'll call it a wrap. Thanks everyone for watching.